Okay, well, thanks for having me. It's been a while since I've been in. I work a lot with K-12, but not very often with higher ed institutions, so it's good to be back here. I'd like to get a feel of the landscape. I know this is a marketing class, but how many of you are interested in working for a tech startup? One? Oh, two? Two? How many of you guys are interested in starting your own companies? Okay, quite a few. Do you guys already have an idea? Or just, yeah, so you've already got an idea that you execute. Well, I thought what I would do is spend the time kind of telling you a little bit about my journey. As you know, I was just introduced, you know that I came from banking. I went and worked for a company called Certiport where we did certifications from Microsoft and Adobe. So it worked with a lot of different schools and then different countries. And then I went to a company called Instructure, and you guys probably all use Canvas. Okay, so I was employee 7 at Instructure, which is now a big billion-dollar company, but I was employee 7, so we always joke that our first Christmas party, we could all fit on one couch, basically. And if you don't like Canvas, it's not my fault anymore, because I haven't been there for years, okay? So, and then I left Instructure right before they went public to start my own company, Because Learning. So I'll tell you a little bit about that. But let me just start with what happened at Instructure. Does anybody know, so it's a learning management system, right? It's the way that you put homework online, right? Did you know that there was actually, okay, well, just be honest. How much of you guys love learning using Canvas right now? How much of you kind of hate it? Okay. How many of you guys find bugs and things that could be better? Okay, probably everyone. If you can imagine, about 2010, there was no better option. So what happened is I got introduced to 2 BYU students. And there's this guy named Vance Checketts he's CEO of a company called Disco. He was, I think he was like chief operation officer at a company called Mosey. And they had just been acquired by EMC. So he said, come by my office, and I want to introduce you to some people. And I saw 2 college students with their backpacks and all that sitting there, and they said, hey, we're interested in starting a company. It's going to be a learning management system. And I said, oh, those are a dime a dozen. And they said, ours is better. And I was like, okay, that's what everyone says. But when I actually looked at the technology, I was actually incredibly impressed. Now, at that time in 2010, you could not use the back button on an LMS. You could not hit back and it would return, like it would just break. So if you can imagine, as college students, you're probably used to using some of the latest and greatest technologies and things like that, but then your system looked like it was from the 1990s. And so it was incredibly frustrating. So those 2 students went to BYU, and they attended an entrepreneur class taught by Josh Coates, who was a serial entrepreneur. And the task was for them to start a business, a fake business. So they'd write a business plan, they'd do some market validation and things like that. And Brian and Devlin, these 2 guys, said, what's the worst piece of software we've ever used? And at that time it was called Blackboard that they were using. And they were like, there's probably a business in making something a little bit better. So they decided to do that. In 2010, they raised about $1 million, and that's when I joined the company. And I'll tell you, honestly, in the first year, I didn't think we were going to make it. It was a terrible market. You had a huge incumbent already there that was wildly successful. And unfortunately, it's hard to get schools to change software, especially something like this, because it affects everyone on campus. You think of all the teachers that have to move their content over. You think about all the training that has to go into it. You think about servers and all of that. It was just a huge mess. But then Blackboard did something incredibly interesting. They had gone into the market and had bought all these smaller players, right? And instead, with the intent of kind of running them, but then they decided they were going to end of life those products because it was easier for them to end of life than try and incorporate that technology into their technology suite. And so when they announced the end of life, what that meant was that schools had to change anyway. So it opened it up for proposals for companies to come in. And that was sheer good luck and timing that happened to us at Instructure. Because since they had to switch anyway, if moving to, Blackboard's latest and greatest or moving to us, it was all the same amount of work. So that's how we were able to win some significant contracts. And once that happened, grew incredibly quickly. Now, that was my experience working at a startup, but I'm going to just draw for you what the typical startup journey is. And I want to talk to you about this kind of life cycle. A lot of times, you join a startup and you think, okay, you start with an idea, right? And then you get interest, and then you get customers, and it's this very linear path, right? And then, it's on the up and up. But let me tell you what kind of my experience has been building my own startup. Because that does happen sometimes. And that's usually what you probably read about and what you see in the news. But what the typical journey is you actually, get an idea here, and you get all this excitement, and then you realize how hard it is, and then you start doing things like pivoting and trying to figure out if someone's interested. You try and raise some money, and it goes down like this, and then eventually you start to get some growth. And that is really, so the ones that you guys that might be interested in starting a business, you might be right here because you're excited about this idea, but there's this whole journey that has to happen right here when you're doing it. So I want to talk to you about kind of that whole process, what that looks like, because I think it's important not only if you're going to start your own business, but anything that you do, whether it's something that you want to do for a personal project or when you go into a company, how you can contribute. So the number one thing is when you have an idea for a company, you just need to do some validation. Number one, are you truly making a product that's better? Are you doing something like Instructure that's better than what was there before, or is it something new and innovative? Okay, so you've got those two categories. And I guarantee if it's new and innovative, it probably isn't. There's probably already someone who's thought of it, because ideas really are truly a dime a dozen. So understand your landscape. Who's out there? Who's doing something similar? Who might be doing something just maybe like 2 steps away from what you're doing and could just pivot a little bit and just take over your idea? Or what is the maybe incumbent or largest competitor doing that's they're maybe ignoring something that you have done? So have you guys heard of that Kodak case study? Have you studied that in business class? Just in a nutshell, Kodak actually was someone on their team in the company actually discovered digital photos. But Kodak was making a lot of money because not only were they selling cameras, they were making the film and they were developing the film. So they decided not to embrace digital photography. Now when you look at the company now, it's virtually non-existent, right? So think about is there something out there that you could almost make them non-existent? Maybe. So you want to think about that. So then once you've got the idea, and this is almost more important than anything, is decide if you're passionate enough about it. Because when you're down here and it's hard, you better feel like whatever you're doing is worth it. And I don't mean just monetarily. It has to be that it brings you personal satisfaction, that you're also maybe helping customers. There's some great software out there that, maybe for accessibility, you're really making lives better or easier for people, but you really have to feel that passionate. And if you don't believe in your own product, that will absolutely translate to everyone that you're trying to sell it to, whether it be investors or customers. So think about that passion, because that's really important. The other thing is will people pay money for it? And the market has changed a lot. What I've seen when I started first working in startups, there was a huge appetite for just users. And we saw big companies. There's a company called Coursera. Have you guys heard of Coursera? They do massive online courses, and they were going to get rid of universities. They were going to put all the Stanford content, all the Harvard content for free online, and they raised hundreds of millions of dollars saying they were going to get rid of universities. We're all kind of still here, right? I mean, now there might be some things, we've seen the market shift, maybe more online stuff, more people taking things remote, which is fantastic, but it didn't actually disrupt the market. Now, when you look at a company like Coursera, they raised, I don't know, maybe $150 million with no plan to revenue. So you know what that means? That you have to run a business sheer on just raising money, right? So at some point in the beginning, people can get excited about like, oh my gosh, you've got millions of users, that I want to give you some money. But if you can't turn into monetization, I guarantee that you're going to have a hard time struggling as a company. So you look at Facebook. Facebook is a great example of something that was free, but then they decided to monetize on ads and data, right? So think about ways that you can monetize. There are big companies today that are still trying to figure that out. And the sooner you figure it out, the better your company and the healthier it's going to be. So what will people pay money, and how much will they pay? Today, do you know that Uber loses $7 on every ride you take? So the more rides you take, the less money they make, right? So they're kind of in trouble because they're able to raise capital, and they're saying they've got users and all of that. But the reality is that until autonomous cars happen, or until they are able to get rid of the drivers, and have self-driving cars, it's going to be really hard for them to turn a profit. So those are kind of some of these things that you have to pay attention to. So the other thing is that, let's see. So you see these companies, do you guys ever watch Silicon Valley on HBO? Okay, you've never watched it. They make fun of a lot of Silicon Valley. It's actually painful for me to watch because it's like my life. So I see my husband and everybody else laughing, and I'm like, no, that really happens. It happened to me the other day. But they were making fun of a pizza company that every time you would order a pizza on the app, and they would actually, the company would buy a pizza from someone else, like Domino's or Papa John's or whatever, stick it in their box and deliver it, and then they would lose money. And so the main character, what he did was he just ordered like 1,000 pizzas and put them out of business, right? Because they were losing money. But that's exactly what happened to MoviePass. Did you guys hear about MoviePass? Shut the doors, right? So monetization is really important. And I really think that what startups, if you're an entrepreneur, you're so excited about your idea, like it's almost dumb, because like, why not get a safe job and a steady job and have some stable income? But you believe in this idea and you believe in the upside, right? You create this, it's going to create wealth, it's going to create a product that the world needs. So you have to go into it with a little bit of like naiveness, but I think one of the things that you can do is just be smart at the very beginning and how you're pricing things and monetizing. So a great way to do that is build your financial model. Have you guys ever built a financial model? Okay, this is a great thing about Excel. You can just make one up. But there are a lot of templates online. You just need to know what your expenses are, what you think your sales are going to be, and then what's that difference, And I guarantee that when I would just go online and find a template, but I guarantee that probably you're going to be off by a lot. Everything's going to cost twice as much, and it's going to take twice as long. So when you think about your model, what investors usually like to see is about a 5-year model. It's hard to think past 3 months when you're building your startup. So start with 12 months. What is the next 12 months going to look like in order for you to build this? But the thing is, with Excel too, you can also make up some crazy numbers and be like, if I just sold 1 million people, then I've made $100 million. And I guarantee selling to 1 million people is a lot of work, so think a lot about that. So the other thing that takes into factor with the pricing is, who's going to buy this from you? So you really need to understand the market. And you guys are marketing people, right? So you understand like the dynamics of like who's your customer, right? I went to a thing called Startup Weekend. Have you guys ever heard of those? Okay, if you haven't done it and you want to build a startup, this is a great way to get some almost like a condensed startup experience over a weekend. And so they keep you for 48 hours, I think it was 72 hours or 48 hours straight where you're working on an idea. Okay, so I acted as a judge on one of these startup weekends. And these guys had this idea that said, we are creating an app, it's an alarm, and anytime you hit snooze, it pays us $1. So the incentive for you to like wake up is that it would cost you less money, right? Which was kind of funny, and they're like, but they said, so I asked, who's your market? And they said, everybody, because everybody needs to wake up, right? Okay, so it's like, what, like 8 billion people need this app, right? So if you use that and you're like, if I only get like 1%, you know, I mean, you just think of these crazy numbers. But in reality, the market for them is who would pay money to be woke, to make sure that they wake up on time. And that's probably a much, much smaller market. So think very carefully about who are those people that you're going to be selling to. Because I mean, I meet with a lot of entrepreneurs, and in the beginning they get so excited and they're like, well, if we just get into Walmart, you know, and it's like there's so much that needs to happen before you need to get into that point. So it's good to be realistic, but still have that optimism that an entrepreneur has. Okay, so let's say you've built your model. You figured out kind of in your head like what the team would need to look like, you know, understanding like what your costs are going to be. And you discover that in order for you to build this idea that you have to raise capital. So have any of you guys that are thinking about building startups, are you thinking about raising venture capital? You're thinking about raising venture capital? Anyone else? Okay, I got some bad news for you. About 0.5% of companies actually raise capital. Okay, so it is very slim. And it kind of sucks because you're a woman too. And the odds are a little bit worse. But let me tell you what venture capital does. It allows you to accelerate your vision, right? There is nothing wrong with the approach of taking a bootstrap business. If you look at, are you guys familiar with Qualtrics? Are you familiar with Pluralsight? Okay, those two companies, bootstrapped. I mean, these guys, they were out of college, you know, did it from their home. They spent 10, 15 years building their business before they ever raised a dime of money, right? So, you know, there is no shame in building a bootstrap business. But sometimes you do need venture capital to help build the product that you're building, especially if there's like a hardware component, or if you just need to, in order to hire talent and things like that. So, you know, venture capital comes in 3 phases. There's friends and family, right? Just going around asking people to put in money. And not everybody's in a situation where they've got friends and family. I mean, you know, if you were to go to your roommates right now, would they be giving money to your idea? Probably not, right? So you may not be in a situation. There is also angel money. And these are angel investors, so they usually need to be accredited investors, but they might write you anywhere from like a $5,000 check to there's some super angels that will write $200,000 checks, right? And then there's venture capital. And venture capitalists are typically, in Utah, we have a handful here, so Kickstart Seed Fund, there's Pelion, there's, why am I forgetting, Mercado, there's Sorensen Capital. So these guys actually will give you financing, and then they own a percentage of your company. And that varies, right? And the ways that you can get VC is, number one, have some traction. At this stage, they're not going to fund an idea. They might hear, and they might hear, but at this stage, at the venture capital side, and you're thinking, that's if you really want to raise about $1 million plus, you really do want to have some sort of traction. So that's in the form of revenue, users, units sold, you know, things like that. So things that you can brag about. But if you get on that track of raising capital, just be aware that you're probably always going to have to be raising capital. So usually companies don't raise just one round, they raise multiple rounds. Angels are great because, you can meet a guy or a girl, and I have some fantastic angel investors that I've met with, and they believed in me. I mean, they didn't really care too much about what I was selling, to the education space. They thought it was kind of cool to invest it, but they believed in me. So they said, I like her, she's gonna work hard, and so they wrote me a check. And I've had angel investors write multiple checks along the way. So it's not a bad thing, but you also have to be constantly communicating with them and letting them know what you're going to be doing. The worst thing you can do is call an angel investor when you're so desperate, because then they're like, do I really want to write this person a check when I've met with these other entrepreneurs and they're kind of on the up and up. And the thing about investors is they have very short attention spans. So, whatever is flashy and new and exciting, they get excited about. And then 2 years later, they could be like, someone's already done that or something like that. So you have to always be communicating them to create that momentum. Now, when you get into the VC stage, all of them will invest. They have what they call their investment theses. So that will be sometimes the markets that they'll invest in. Sometimes it'll be the stage that you're at. So seed investment. Well, so there's really there's this pre-seed, then there's seed, and then there's series, let's say A through E, and these go on later. So pre-seed would be kind of really, really early, and there's not a whole lot of people that do pre-seed rounds, because it's almost kind of where the angels are at right now. But some of them will be like, oh, you kind of fit in this category, and then your round might be less than $500,000, as pre-seed. Your seed round is about $1 million plus, and then your Series A is there on that. I have seen this shift in requirements in the 5 years that I've been running my own company. So it used to be that if you had $1 million in revenue, you could raise a Series A. That was kind of the threshold. That is now changed to $3 million in revenue is what they want to look at. Because what's happening is it's a lot cheaper to start a company these days, right? If you're building an app or building some sort of technology, you host on AWS, right? You don't have to buy servers. You can get remote talent. You don't have to necessarily have an office. You can work at a co-working space. There's all these things that have made it much more cost effective for companies to start their businesses. So they want to see you farther along than they have before. The other thing is these rounds have ballooned. So back in the day, $1 million seed round was pretty common. Now that's kind of a small round. You'd want to see 2.5. So they expect their capital to go a little bit farther. So raising venture capital, though, is kind of the worst experience in the world. So I'm going to be honest with you. It's there's nothing worse than having to stand in front of people who know this much about your business, and you have to brag about yourself and then ask them if they'll write you a check. There's nothing really fun about that. But the reality is that there is a lot of capital out there, but it's all about whose attention you can get, who you can connect with. And a lot of these investors do what they call pattern matching. So a very obvious pattern matching is you had Mark Zuckerberg, who college dropout, started a company, wears hoodies. So then every guy that said, I dropped out of college to start my company and I'm wearing a hoodie, they were like, I think you could be the next Mark Zuckerberg, right? And it was funny because just last summer I was meeting with these two college students and they were starting a company. And one of them said, I just pulled a Zuckerberg. And I was like, what's a Zuckerberg? He's like, I dropped out of college. And I was like, go back to school. That's the worst kind of pattern matching. But other things that they'll pattern match are Things like, is this a market that we're familiar with? Have we seen similar companies grow really quickly at this? Is this something in terms of like the story, like Instructure? Once Instructure launched, there were a lot more LMSs that came up because they're like, Instructure proved a market, we can prove a market. So they'll do pattern matching. Unfortunately, pattern matching can also mean age, gender. It can also mean the color of your skin. So when I talked about that, 0.05, so 0.5% of all companies get funded. When you look at the overall landscape, if you're a person of color or if you're a female, 7% of that capital goes to that demographic. And in Utah, it's worse, it's 2%. So you really have to think about, is this the route you're going to take? Now, I don't want to discourage you from raising venture capital, but what I want you to do is be very smart about it and understand that there are now, because this type of attention is happening, there are now venture capital firms that focus on underrepresented founders, and they focus on funding females only. And so I've seen that change. In 2014, when I was raising my first round, that did not even exist. There was nothing called like a females founder fund or anything like that. So those are opportunities, and those are things that are changing. But and the reason why I'm telling you guys this is because if you're ever in a situation where you are writing checks, or you are building companies, I want you to have that in mind, that pattern matching has to go beyond just the way the person looks, okay? I think that's really important, and that's the only way we're gonna make changes, by creating awareness. Okay, so if you've never started a business before, some of the resources that I recommend is that you start looking at some online resources, and there are some great ways that you can do this that does not cost you a penny. Have you guys ever heard of Lean Startup Canvas? Okay, look that up. It's a one-pager that you fill out these blocks and kind of talk about what it means to, like, what your business idea is going to look like, what your market's going to look like, and you're going to see some holes there. And that's great, because the earlier you identify them, the better you are when you run off with your business. So things like that. Another good thing to think about are accelerator programs. Have you guys heard of like Y Combinator? There's Techstars. Not all of them are fantastic, not all of them are equal, but there are these online accelerators which you can join. You have to apply and join. And usually what happens is they'll give you some capital, usually anywhere I've seen from $20,000 to $150,000. And if you get in, they'll give you that money. They take a percentage of your company, but they're going to supply you with mentorship, and they're going to supply you with resources to help you grow that company. Now, usually for that, if you're going to be doing something like that, they usually like to see co-founders. They usually like to see two people in a business. And the reason is, it's kind of this, one's business person, one's technical, is usually what ends up happening. But there are some great advantages to having a co-founder, and there are some disadvantages. I have a co-founder. We have a great working relationships. We don't always agree. I'm very move forward, and he's like the most cautious guy, so somehow we tend to balance each other out. But it took us a while to get to that relationship. And he complements my skill sets in areas that I don't. So he is much more technical than I am. So if you are able to find a co-founder that you can work well with, that's fantastic. So these accelerators usually like to see that because it just, in their mind, seems like it's a little bit more stable, a little bit more of a sure chance that something would come out of this. Now, co-founders are tough. We've seen co-founder breakups. If you've seen the Social Network, for example, things can blow up. And I've seen them where they've had 3, then there was 2, and then there was 1, and there's things like that. It's just people stuff. So just be aware, whoever you're going to have help you build your business should offer some other benefit that you don't bring to the table. So you can't be everything to everyone. So I talked about Startup Weekend. They do them here in Salt Lake. They've done them in Provo and Ogden. Kind of keep an eye out for them, but it's kind of a fascinating concept. You go and you can come with an idea, or you don't have to have an idea. And basically what you do is you get together in a room, and there might be 100, 150 people there. You pitch an idea, or you listen to pitches, and then they pick, let's say, like the 5, 6 best ideas, and then you go and build that company and product as much as you can in a 48-hour period. So that means you're talking to customers. I've seen full app development. I've seen people launch just the website. I've seen people create the pitch decks. So, there's varying stages of it, and then you are judged, and the winner gets applause. But it's kind of a way to, compact that experience and kind of get a sense of what that is. And then the other thing is that think about, and I'm really kind of passionate about this, but when you build your company, think about who is the talent. Because as much as when these guys are investing, probably not friends and family, but angel and VCs, like the founder and the team means almost more than the idea. Because if you don't have a good team, then it doesn't matter how brilliant the idea is. And I've seen some brilliant brilliant ideas and brilliant products with terrible teams, and I don't think they're going to survive. And so when you think about the team, it's not just like who works hard. It's thinking about what's that kind of company culture you're going to build. Are people bought in? Are people excited about it? Are they going to really work hard on it? The other thing is that you really would do yourselves a huge benefit by having diverse voices on your team. What happens too often is that when you do a company, you hire within your friend network and your, who you know, and it's a lot of people that think and look and act like you. But if you're selling a product, let's say, like in my example, I'm selling into K-12, that just look like my kids or just look like the environment in Utah, we would never be able to scale it outside of this market. And so it is important that you have that diverse voice in there. And I'm not just saying like by having like the token black guy there, I'm actually saying like having people have a seat at the table and allowing them to contribute and help build those products. I think that, when we think about, building product, that is almost so more important than anything else, because when you get to that point, when you're trying to scale a product, if you can't go outside your market, it doesn't matter. And almost at that point, you're too late. So if you build these things early in and bake it into your company culture, that helps that scale a lot easier. How much time do we have?
10 minutes.
Okay.
15 minutes.
Okay, so it's before Q&A or?
It's 1:35.
Okay, so I did a lot of talking, but I just want to is anyone here willing to share their startup idea? Could we workshop an idea? Okay.
Well, it's not like tech anything.
Okay, that's okay.
I wanted to start a material fabrication.
Okay, material fabrication. And tell me, what's material fabrication?
Like functional materials. So things, any basic materials like steel, wood,
Okay.
Fiberglass.
Okay, so those already exist.
Right.
So what's unique about what your business would?
Well, I've kind of just got a vague idea of it right now, but different markets I think that they could apply to would be like things I'm into, like 4-wheel drive.
Okay.
So like off-road vehicles,
Uh-huh.
that sort of thing. Because if you can, I noticed that a lot of companies focus on one thing or the other, but
Uh-huh.
if you can kind of do all of them,
Okay.
then that would be one element of it.
So would you be the producer or the distributor? What would you?
I kind of just envisioned it as both.
Okay.
I guess.
So you would produce and then
So
distribute.
Get raw materials.
Okay.
Produce them, and then
But
as starting, just I guess ship them.
right. So and you one of the things I noticed you said is like kind of in markets that you're interested in, like
Right.
off-roading, which is cool.
Yeah, there's like
Yeah.
several different ideas of stuff that I'm interested in.
Uh-huh.
I've kind of thought about it, but I'm open to like apply it to whatever I can.
Right. So what's stopping you from doing it?
Probably capital.
Okay,
time,
money.
you know,
Money, yeah,
resources.
okay. Yeah, I mean, that's a big thing. I see a lot of people kind of in your stage where they've got this idea and something that they want to do, but time and money mean a lot, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you have
Also,
your,
like access to materials at a cost that's realistic. And
Yep.
that sort of thing.
yeah, absolutely. So one of the things, let's think of some small steps of what you could do in order to just even get to a point where you feel like you could be at a launch phase. So it sounds like you've done a little bit of research.
Minor.
Okay, so I'd encourage you to do a little bit more research. I would encourage you to do like a lean startup
Okay.
model.
We can start on that.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be tech, it can be anything, but what it allows you to do is to really think about the ideas and where the holes are, right?
Okay.
And then there's this saying that we used at my company a lot, which was like, good enough is fine. So you would not believe the amount of stuff that gets released and put out into market, and it's not quite ready,
Yeah.
right? So you've heard of betas. That's used very loosely, beta and production and things like that. I remember one time with my company, we sell these sensor kits, right? And it costs money, and we had to produce it out of China and all of that, and they require 50% of the payment up front, and then when they send it to you. Well, the problem is like, you're sitting on inventory, so it's always like a cash flow problem, when you order stuff. And we needed to push some sales numbers, so we said, let's do a sales promotion, And then our ops guy is like, we don't have any kits left. We only have like a handful, and then we're out of inventory. And I said, well, if it's successful, then that's a good problem to have, right? Well, it was successful, and it was apparently a really bad problem to have, So sometimes you just need to do something, because we were just doing this test. We wanted to test a new business model, and it was actually really successful. And so, yeah, we had to make it up. But there are a lot of times where you're just kind of winging it, and that's okay. I mean, there is I'd say a high tolerance for that in a lot of markets. If you go to, for example, Japan, like they have a different business culture, and it would not be tolerated at all. They do not release software with bugs, things like that. Americans, we're okay with bugs, we get it. Yeah, so just know that that's, you can do a little bit just to try things out, and it doesn't have to be perfect.
I just had a quick question.
Yeah.
That's all right. So I follow several entrepreneurs just to say like generically what they're saying about certain stuff.
Yep.
I don't know if you know Gary Vaynerchuk, however you say his last name, Vaynerchuk. Is it Vaynerchuk?
I don't think I know him.
Okay, well he's one of those just kind of random.
Uh-huh.
You love him or hate him, I guess. But he was saying basically like, if you just heard about it, you're already too late. Is that kind of true?
Well, it's kind of like what I said about is like ideas are not unique. I guarantee, like anytime someone's like said, I've got this amazing idea, I'm like, oh, like so and so, and they're like, who are they? So that's why it's important to do research. The thing that's different, and this is where you can kind of differentiate yourselves from other people, is actually doing something about it. Because how many of us have like, oh my gosh, this would be a brilliant idea, right? I do it all the time. I've got like 10 more startup ideas, right? But am I going to do it? Probably not. Am I going to devote any energy and time to it? Probably not more than just thinking about it. I'm busy. I've got my own thing going on. So the difference is whether or not you execute on it. And I heard Tim Cook say that there's 3 things that you can do when you do a business. You can be first, you can be the best, or you can be, what did he say, the cheapest, But so like for them, they chose to be best. So they're not always going to be first. They're never going to be the cheapest, but they're always going to be the best. So really when you look at your business, if you're not, they're there, there's other people that might be doing it, but doesn't mean that someone's done it, So, or maybe you're going to have a different spin to it. Yeah.
About 10 minutes.
Okay. What other questions do you guys have? And I will be very honest, so you can ask me anything. Go ahead.
You some businesses that have kind of a model of race to the bottom kind of thing, where all they really care about is market penetration.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a 1099 private contractor guy for food delivery services,
Mm-hmm.
like Grubhub and DoorDash
Yep.
and Uber Eats, those are particular, like Grubhub kind of started as a premium, like, get stuff from fancy restaurants.
Yep.
But they realized that their competitors like DoorDash and Uber Eats were getting stuff from like fast food places, and they wanted to take part in that.
Yep.
But I don't know if they realize this or not, but no one makes money on that particular course of things, and so their quality went way down.
Yep.
There are a lot of businesses, obviously. I thought of MoviePass when you said it.
Mm-hmm.
But do you feel like there are any ethical considerations to business models that do this? Like, should they exist, or should we like do whatever's possible to stop them from this kind of business model?
So that's a really good question. I think that should they exist, they're going to exist, right? Because there's going to be someone that's got this idea, and then there's going to be someone who's going to fund it, right? Because they see what they're looking at is acquisition of users, and that how can we turn them into doing something else? Like, can Grubhub, for example, also grab your dry cleaning? Can they do some of these other things and services so that they can start turning a profit or making it make sense? Whether or not it's ethical, I think that the consumer now is a lot more savvy. And I think that the younger generation of our consumers are taking that into consideration, right? So a good example would be like Uber and some of the allegations that they had with sexual harassment and poor working environment. A lot of people deleted Uber and went to Lyft, right? So I think that there are some things like that happen, and really it's driven by the consumer. The thing is that, a lot of companies are able to differentiate themselves by creating a brand that kind of showcases some of those ethical considerations. So whether it's using sustainable products or recycling or things like that, then that's a way they can differentiate themselves. But you really then leave it up to the consumer, and you can do some tests. I always encourage when, you should look at anything that you do with your company as an experiment. So, we're going to test this message out here, and we're going to see if that opens our email rates, increases that. Is that a message that resonates with our customers? So you should be doing those tests all the time to see if that resonates with them. Does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm. And I've also used Blackboard back in 2011. I thought I forgot about it, but you brought up some traumatic experience.
That's so funny. I'll never forget, when we would tour schools for the first time, and we showed that our Canvas didn't use Flash, and we got standing ovation from the teachers, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's not that hard to be a lot better. So there was definitely a market there, but that's funny that you bring that up. What other questions do you guys have? Yes.
The importance of culture
Mm-hmm.
in startups. What do you do what are some of your leadership strategies?
Yeah, so culture starts from the top. So the way that the CEO and the leadership team acts is what permeates down. Now, people get confused sometimes and says, culture is free meals and ping pong tables and things like that. That is not culture. That's just kind of the environment. So think about what are the values that you want. So I want my employees, when they come to work, to feel validated, to feel heard. I want them there to be passionate about their work. I want them to be upward mobility within. Think about what those values are, and then you create programs around that to facilitate it. Too often we think our culture is fun and Nerf guns. That's not culture. So, but you just really have to identify those values, and it has to really be communicated from on top. I've seen too many times at big companies where CEO behaves kind of like a big old jerk, and then the HR person says, but our culture is respectful and things like that. If the CEO's not doing it, no one else believes that. So I really think it comes down to values that you decide as a company. I'm sorry.
Obviously, besides your company, what is one you wish you were a part of?
Ooh, what is one that I was? Well, I don't know if there's one that. I mean, there have been some interesting ones that I've seen, but I'll tell you what. So, when I was at Certiport, I had an opportunity to join the company Mosey. It's now EMC. And my buddy was trying to recruit me, and he said, come over here, but I'd have to take a pay cut. I'd have to take a $10,000 pay cut. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. And then they sold for $72 million 6 months later, and I was so pissed at myself. So when the opportunity came to join Instructure, I was like, I'm not going to make that same mistake twice. So that's what made me, I took a pay cut, a bigger pay cut that time, to join Instructure, and it worked out. You know, they're not always going to work out, but you can't look at it just from a monetary perspective. It has to be like how you advance your career, the lessons that you learn, and how you're going to take that to the next thing. Because, I mean, startups die all the time, and very few of them are really successful and a great payout for everybody. But if you can take that to jump to the next thing, I mean, people will hire CEOs where their companies close down because they have had all this experience of what not to do. So, you know, I think that risk is okay. You have to decide how much risk you want to take personally. Okay, well, I'm here if you want to chat or anything. I'm happy to answer.